Somebody prepared to call the roll? I can do that from the minutes from last time. Let's see. I am here, William Rich. Roll calls really don't make a lot of sense in this context. I'm just going to note that Jim Simon is here, John Blickel is not, Barbara Brown is here, Rana Matar is here, Pedro Avalos II is here, Matt Timbrook is here, Margot Somerville is here, and Don Christian is here. Since nobody told me I made a mistake, I must have done that right. First item on the agenda is the adoption of the minutes of the May 19th meeting. Is there a motion to adopt those minutes as distributed?
So moved.
Thank you. Any corrections to the minutes? If not, all in favor of adopting the minutes as distributed, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Minutes are adopted without dissent. Next item is the chair's opening remarks. As you can see from the agenda, we have one item of unfinished business to consider today, and that's concerned to section 95. And then we have items of new business to consider, all of which relate to county hiring and promotion procedures and practices, and the modernization of the Human Resources Department. So with no further ado, let's go to unfinished business and section 95. Who's presenting that?
I guess I can, if Shelley doesn't object, I can update with what we did. And I think this finally, the last version got circulated today, earlier today, because I had forgotten after working through with Chairperson Rich on the language that he had noted that might lead to unintended consequences regarding shifting, some of the language in situations where council would be, waiving the publication and competitive bidding requirements. We also had forgotten I had forgotten to add, there was an inconsistency with non-professional service that had been pointed out in the previous meeting. So we added that to the paragraph where it was not included, and then made the suggestions that Professor Rich had suggested. And I think that should be what was circulated today. I don't know how to share that on the screen if someone needed that, but that was the extent of the changes from what you saw.
I can share if we need to, if you guys want to take a look. Let's see. So this was the section that I think Commissioner Brown pointed out. So we added or non-professional services there.
And then that makes it consistent with the initial paragraph.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then down here was the language that was adjusted. Which talks about the requirement of competitive bidding and advertising being waived by City Council. So we changed that wording. And then down below, there was just another reference to his office. So we made it his or her office.
And then Shelley, I think it's hard to see, but in the previous paragraph,
Correct.
we added the word it, yeah. Which was, I think, just a typo from the previous.
And so
No,
those.
it wasn't a typo. It was just left out of it was missing in the original.
Right.
It just wasn't grammatical in the current charter. So this looks good to me. Any comments? If not, we might be prepared to approve our first proposed change. What do you think?
Sounds good.
Is there a motion to approve the proposed amendments to section 95?
I'll make it that motion.
Okay. Any debate on the motion? By the way, under Robert's rules, just so for everybody's benefit, because I know everybody's used to seconds, but for a commission this small, there's really no need for motions to be seconded. Any debate on the motion? If not, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion is adopted without dissent.
Thank
We're
you.
ready to move on to new business now.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Yes.
So who's going to present the overview of modernization of the Human Resources Department?
It'll
You're
be
muted.
Yamini and Stacy, who are muted currently, but I believe are.
There you go. Okay, sorry about that. We're just trying to get the screen here for you. Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
very good. So, good evening, everyone. We want to, well, first of all, I'd like to do is introduce you to Stacy Doty. She is the Employment Selection and Recruitment Manager for the Department of Human Resources currently. She, Stacy, right here, and she has been with the city of Akron for over 25 years and has functioned in this capacity and basically handled a variety of personnel HR matters for the city throughout these years. And so she really has a wealth of knowledge and will be doing the substantial portion of this PowerPoint for all of you. But our goal today was to provide all of you, before we start presenting proposals regarding HR matters, with an overview of just how, the why behind some of the things that we're doing here and what we're trying to accomplish. In 2016, and Stacy's going to go over this with you, but I'll just briefly tell you that in 2016, the voters were presented with a charter amendment from the city that really called for a very robust HR department. The way we're going to really talk to you a little bit about how the relationship with the Civil Service Commission was with the city personnel department and how they functioned previously, and what this charter amendment really, the intent was to create and modernize and have an functioning HR department to handle HR matters. Matters in the city were being handled in a very siloed fashion previous to that, and a little disjointed. And the goal here is to really put the vest into the HR department those duties and make sure that they're able to function in the capacity that HR departments now in the modern era are functioning, where they are actually a business partner. They are there at the table and involved in the daily decision making, and a very helpful and important part of the heartbeat of often most of the organizations. So I'm going to hand this over to Stacy, and she's going to go into some of the more facts about what's happened here at the city of Akron.
Okay. Thank you, Yamini. I'm going to go to the next slide here. We'll start with the overview of the old civil service model. You can see the Civil Service Commission was at the top. They appointed a personnel director who then appointed the personnel department employees. And the Civil Service Commission, they're not regular city employees. They're not involved in the day-to-day operations of the city. They're kind of removed from all of the operations and the knowledge of what is going on in the different departments and how things are working. They only meet once, they did meet once a month to hear appeals, and they did not provide human resource services, but they did expect the personnel director to do some of those things. But the personnel director mainly functioned as an administrative person for the Civil Service Commission, not necessarily for the mayor or for the workforce or for the citizens. They were doing the work for the commission. So we had the civil service rules that were outlined exactly what we had to do and how to do it, and they were ancient pretty much.
The personnel director did not have a very good relationship with the administration before this administration because they were so separate, and the personnel department did not function as a cohesive resources group. The personnel department employees were very siloed and they were more transactional. They did not function as a business partner. They were removed from what was going on in the city as far as what direction departments wanted to go and how they needed to accomplish what they needed to accomplish. They also did not provide general communication or services that the departments needed. So the departments created their own methods of doing things, such as forms, leave requests, different processes and discipline. That led to inconsistencies, and we're trying to resolve all those issues. By 2016, when the voters approved the charter amendment, their intention was to consolidate all matters of personnel, employee relations, employee health and welfare through this creation of the Department of Human Resources. With the 2016 charter change, we have focused on creating a uniform and robust human resources department that serves the entire workforce. Instead of focusing on only rules, we're now focusing on procedures and policies and guidance for our workforce and our managers. Any questions so far? So since 2016, we've been complying with the charter changes that happened at that time, building our new human resources department. We have evolved quite a bit since then. We amended our civil service rules. Like I said, they pretty much outlined everything we had to do, and they were very difficult to react to things that happened in business or different situations. They did not function well for communicating with departments and helping them do what they were needing to do. The civil service rules were amended, so then from there, we established human resources procedures and policies, and those are similar to the rules, but they're much more friendly to work with. It's not so difficult to get things done anymore. We also moved employee benefits from finance department, and we've established health and wellness programs and safety programs. We're trying to do more and more to help our employees and help managers do what they need to do. These new procedures and policies they've helped us become more agile in response to changes in laws and business practices and emergencies such as this COVID-19 pandemic. We definitely could not have done what we've done as successfully if we had been in the old system. So we're going to continue to improve on that. Again, the charter changes passed in 2016 was an important step, but we need to further clarify and continue to move forward, establishing an efficient human resources department. We need to have the full authority to carry out the functions expected as a human resources department. So we're trying to clarify the role of the Civil Service Commission as well as the role of the Human Resources Department so that we can continue to improve our workforce, the effectiveness of our managers, and the ability to efficiently and effectively serve the citizens of Akron. So some of the goals that we have in this process are to, one, align hiring and employment practices with peer cities and the state of Ohio. We want to create a more inclusive hiring practice, which will encourage a more diverse workforce. We want to provide a more competitive hiring process to attract and retain the most qualified employees. And we want to preserve protections against political influences and patronage. We still want to do that. And we want to update provisions to support our goals in our first human resources department. I know our HR director always says he's the first HR director for the city of Akron, and people are shocked, but it's about time. Some of the things that we could do, because some of the goals that we have are the hiring practices. We want to expand the rule of 3. We'll talk about that later. That will help us in considering not just someone's test taking skills, but also the whole package of a person as we're moving them through the selection process. So some of the hurdles that we have with the current charter, the first one is a pretty big one. The preference points awarded to veterans and Akron residents when they're fully implemented are a deciding factor on who is promoted or hired, which can conflict with the practice of merit and fitness. A lot of times you'll see what the language says, but sometimes people who barely meet the qualifications and barely pass the test may have all these points and be rocketed to the top of the list, even though they're not necessarily the best candidate or aligned with the qualifications of the job, and the principles of merit and fitness kind of they go out the window. Another thing is we have a very limited pool of eligible candidates for the position for the manager to choose from. Right now, they can only interview the top 3 candidates, and that is very frustrating a lot of times, especially with this exorbitant number of bonus credits that people can get. 40% on top of a passing grade is 98% on a test, which almost no one gets 97 and higher on a test. That means you have to be perfect pretty much to overcome those bonus points. The state of Ohio and other cities created HR departments years ago in the Ohio Revised Code. They updated their practices in 1987, and we want to do the same. Also, we want to align the responsibilities of the Human Resources Director and the Civil Service Commissioner so that we can accomplish what we need to accomplish. So Akron, the current charter allows up to 40% preference points for both hiring and promotions. No other major Ohio City charter awards nearly that number of points. The highest I've seen really is a total of 15% for both residency and veterans, but most are much lower than that, maybe 5 points. It's not a percentage, and they don't give any preference for promotional exams. So what you have in front of you is the existing section 106A. As you can see in the language, residents and veterans who pass an examination and they have to meet the criteria receive 20% of their score added to the examination for each factor. This is very difficult to rationalize for professional positions requiring specialized skill, knowledge, or abilities, because we're a lot of times recruiting from a wide area. We might have some candidates that live in the city, but for positions like city engineer, wastewater plant superintendent, those require very high level certifications, and they require a lot of knowledge, and they have to have that coming in the door. And someone with more knowledge will be a better employee. Just because they live in Akron is not necessarily a merit that they're going to be a better employee. For other positions, we have, maybe they don't require so much skill, or like police and fire, we have an organized training process where we train them. They don't have to bring that knowledge with them. Those positions we can usually justify a higher percentage of residency credit or veterans credit, because we train them and they don't need to bring as much to the table. Again, with the recruitment, sometimes with 20% residency and 20% bonus credit, candidates see that and they tell us they don't want to waste their time going through our selection process because they know they won't be able to be considered, they won't be high enough. And they don't even apply sometimes because they see that. So we want to increase our pool of applicants and bring people here to Akron because we know it's a great place to live, work, and play. Any questions so far?
I just had a request before we move on to the proposed changes. I don't know if you could actually just walk them through like a mathematical example of how the points work and how they're applied, in a hypothetical for, say, someone who has a barely passing score.
Sure, those were in my notes for the next slide. So a resident who is also a veteran would receive 40% added onto the test score. The minimum passing score is 70%. So no one that that scores 69 or below will be considered. They don't meet the criteria, they're not moving on. But anyone who gets 70%, 20% of 70% is 14 points. So if they're only a resident, they would get a score of 84. If they are a resident and a veteran, their score would be 98. So 98, from being barely passing to being all the way at the top of the list because of where they live or because of being, you know, a veteran, which is, it's a service to our country, and we're very grateful. And we're not talking about taking those points away on entry exams, but for promotional exams, it's very difficult because once you are a veteran, you're a veteran. And once you get hired, your status as a veteran is not going to change. So you can't do anything to increase those points or gain those points after you're already here. Plus you already get credit coming in the door for those, for being a veteran. No matter what, we're going to give preference points for veterans. But the percentage that we have right now is it's hard to overcome, and it's discouraging for many employees. Well, for the employees who aren't veterans, yes, but also for people that are applying for our open positions from, you know, Akron or anywhere else. Does that help? So some other background about our promotional exams. 2 of the city's unions have already done away with preference points for promotional exams through their collective bargaining agreements. The 3rd union, they've negotiated a percentage of 5% percentage points for promotional exams, and that's in their collective bargaining agreement right now. So unless they want to change that, that's going to stay no matter what the charter says. The percentage of people that are actually affected by this charter provision is just about 25% of our workforce, our non-bargaining positions, our management positions, and our ASP union employees. So maybe 500 or 600 people at the most. The rest of the employees are not affected because they've already bargained that, either to reduce the percentage or to not have that included at all. So the proposed new section, basically we are eliminating promotional preference points for veterans and residents. And then we are allowing the Department of Human Resources to determine the methods and points awarded to qualified residents and veterans. And when we're doing that, we're looking at the knowledge, skills, and abilities required, and we'll have standards for why some positions are a higher percentage than others if we're going to do it that way. Do you have any questions or comments? So I can read this. This is the proposed version. It's veterans of the Armed Forces of the United States of America who receive a passing grade on any non-promotional examination, and Akron residents who receive a passing grade on any non-promotional examinations shall be awarded preference points by the Department of Human Resources. And then the rest of it is the same.
And again, with the veterans, the main piece here is that we're eliminating them with respect to the promotion because they already got them when they came into the city.
Right. So they're not going to double dip their credit. Basically, once you're in a position in the city, we want those promotions to be based on merit and fitness only.
The other thing that this is doing is it's eliminating the 20%. So it would be up to the Department of Human Resources then to determine how much of a preference to give to veterans and residents for a given position.
That's right.
So I have a question. So with that, the Director of Human Resources having that authority, is there a plan? Are there certain jobs that would warrant higher percentage points than others, or what are you considering, or what is on the table right now?
Well, we don't have a solid plan. We would say professional positions requiring a great deal of knowledge or specialized skill would have a lower percentage, maybe like 5% for residency. Veterans, maybe 5. And then positions like police and fire, where there's a training program, those would have a higher percentage because we train them, and we really want a lot of Akron residents to be involved in the safety forces. We want people who work where they live, and we encourage residency for those as well. But we have a broader pool because those positions only require driver's license in high school. We can offer a higher percentage. But really, police and fire hire, maybe labor, entrance level positions, administrative assistants, that type of position would get a higher higher percentage because we train them pretty much, rather than expecting them to bring it all to the table when they come in.
Are there questions or comments about the proposed changes?
I could just add that, especially with respect to residency, the administration did reach out when this came to us, as far as, bringing it to this group. And we reached out to some veteran groups about these proposed changes, and they were in agreement that the most important benefit for their members would be that entry level, getting their foot in the door, preference points upon hiring, and they did not feel that it was essential to continue to offer preference points for promotional exams.
I feel like this seems like a good modernization of rules that may prove to help Akron be able to compete for the best potential candidates out there. So I'm in favor of this.
That is our goal.
Other comments or questions? Is there a motion to approve the proposed changes to Charter Section 106A?
Move.
Okay. Last chance for debate on the motion. Since I don't hear any, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is adopted without dissent. Next, we have Charter Section 108.
All right.
I forgot the slide. Right. This Charter Section 108 is regarding appointments. The current charter language, I'm going to summarize that. The Director of Human Resources, when there's a position to be filled, certifies or refers the 3 candidates with the highest final score on the eligibility list to the manager. So the manager receives, usually it's 3 names. Sometimes there's a tie. They might get a tie depending on what position is and how many candidates we have. So there could be a few more candidates if it's a huge group. But usually it's only 3 candidates they get to choose from. So in this section, they get 3 candidates. If the list contains fewer than 3 names, then they can either make a selection or they can ask for a full certification, which would require us to establish another eligibility list. We'd merge those candidates in and move forward with the selection process. Also in this section, it talks about provisional appointments, that they cannot exceed 90 days, and temporary appointments cannot exceed 270 days. In this section, the last paragraph talks about temporary appointments and seasonal appointments, and temporary and seasonal positions are filled the same way as everything else, which is difficult for us a lot of times. We have a lot of seasonal positions for our recreation department and for leaf season and snow and ice. We have to wait until we have posted it and have all of our applicants, and then go through this testing process and rank them, and then start with the top 3 and go through the managers make their selection. It takes a lot of time, and we are proposing some changes, which I'll go over, that should help in speeding that up and becoming more efficient with that process. And it's also similar to the way a lot of other cities do it. So our proposed changes are that instead of the rule of 3, we will have what we call the rule of
10, where the 10 highest scoring candidates are referred or certified to the manager for consideration, and that manager would make a selection from those 10 candidates. If the list or the certification contains fewer than 4 names, then they can ask for us to post it again and then recruit and establish another list to get additional candidates. So that's a big change for us that will help in broadening the pool. The testing process, we work very hard to make sure it's valid and it's reliable and it tests what we need for that position. It's very individualized for each position, but some people are not good test takers. And if you're looking at a list and you have someone with a score of 92 and another score is 91, what is the actual difference between those 2 candidates? So with a rule of 10, it puts less weight on that test. And some people just aren't good at taking tests. So it will help with expanding the pool and hopefully producing a more diverse workforce. For this one, we're also asking for the provisional appointments to be determined by the Human Resources Director. So if sometimes it takes a long time to fill a position, 90 days is just not enough. If we can extend that would help us in making sure we make the right selection and not just trying to move fast so we get it done within 90 days. We also are allowing for the Director of Human Resources to provide for seasonal or temporary appointments. So what we'd like to do is as we post, as we get applications, send them for interview, go as fast as we can to fill these positions where we need 40 people to work leaf season and we don't have to wait for this whole process and this many days for this and this many days for that. So we'd like to do it more quickly and efficiently. Also, we are simplifying the language here regarding a person who is certified and considered 3 times from an eligible list. We're not changing the process that we use, we're just changing the wording to make it more clear. This, both ways, the old way and the new way, basically says that someone who's certified from a list 3 times or more may be removed. And a lot of times that's necessary. For instance, when a hiring manager is maybe the only one that uses a list for our 911 operators, we're not going to send the same person over and over for an interview when they know they're not going to pick that person. We're going to, after they pick 3 other people when they're considering this person, they'll be able to ask to remove that person's name. And usually there's a really good reason why we do that. And we don't always remove the name. Sometimes the person might not be a good fit for the first department for administrative assistant, for instance. Maybe one department needs somebody who's really good at PowerPoint and they pick the person that's good at PowerPoint, but the other 2 candidates are just fine and they'll stay on the list and be interviewed for the next position. There's nothing that they need to be removed for. They're still a good candidate. So they could stay on for many different interviews. And with a rule of 10, people might go on quite a few interviews because they'll be probably going to a lot of interviews because we will interview 10 instead of 3. Any questions on the proposed changes?
I have a couple. So with the rule of 10, that means that they get 10 names, or they have to interview all 10 people?
They'll have to interview all 10 people.
Okay. And what's the definition of provisional?
Provisional is a temporary appointment. Basically, it's almost like an emergency appointment. For instance, you would use a provisional appointment when you absolutely have to have that position filled and it cannot be vacant. For instance, city engineer, when we had someone retire, it took us a long time to find. We did a national search. Yeah, it's like an interim. But that position has to be filled. We can't leave it unfilled. We don't do that for most positions, but we would for a position like fire chief, police chief. We've done it for positions in fire because of contract. They have to have a position filled for an EMS chief or something like that. Those would be situations where we would use provisional.
Okay, and just for clarification, if we're going to present this to the voters, we may need to define that so that people know what it means.
Okay, thank you.
Do you ever use provisionals to mean anything other than interim?
Not really. Sometimes the provisional actually ends up getting the position, but they're interim and then they become permanent.
Right. But what I'm thinking is, in response to what Barb said, maybe we should just use the term interim instead of provisional, if provisional would always mean interim. And that way it would be self-explanatory. You wouldn't need to define it.
I want to say that.
I can hear.
It's
Provisional, the term provisional, we can take a look at that point, and it might make sense to do it that way. The word provisional is something that is a term that's used in state law, and it's in, so that's why it's derived from that. But
it's standard in all the charters that we've seen in the Ohio Revised Code, that language.
Okay, well,
I don't know if it's possible to do provisional / interim, if that would be helpful too.
Oh, I hate slashes.
Okay, no slashes.
No, I mean, if the term provisional has kind of a standard meaning in civil service law, then it's probably best to stick with that.
Yeah.
I think we also just need to consider if we are presenting this to the average person who doesn't know charter law, they need to be able to understand it. So I would just make sure that we use that lens as we're through this process.
Yeah, and I think we should keep in mind that, there is not only the actual proposed charter amendment, but there will be ballot language. So in the ballot language, we instead of using provisional, we could use the word interim.
Yeah, and explaining it. Yeah.
Right. Or we could just explain it, right? Most people, will read, people will read the ballot language. They may or may not read the actual charter amendment.
Right.
This question may have been answered, but maybe I missed it. There's an opening for a provisional or temporary appointment. Human Resource Director select that individual from a certified list of 10, or how does that?
I didn't hear your whole question. Did you ask how the provisional appointment is made?
No, whether the person appointed would come from the list, that 10-person list that's already in process or under review.
I think we're having trouble hearing with the question.
Your audio is breaking up. I don't know whether you could maybe get closer to the microphone. I'm not sure whether that would help, but might try it.
Where do you select the person appointed to these seasonal jobs?
Okay.
Do they come from that list?
He's asking, does a provisional come from that list of 10?
Okay, so I will answer what I think you're asking. Provisional appointments, it depends on the situation. So a lot of times we have a provisional appointment because we didn't know the position was going to be vacant and we don't have a list. So we don't have a list to hire from. For instance, in police and fire, they always will have a list based on their contract language. They will always have a list and they will use the list for provisional appointments, but that's fire and it's not necessarily for all positions. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Well, I'm not hearing any, so I'm wondering whether you might be ready to proceed to a motion to approve the proposed amendments to Charter Section 108. Does anybody wish to make such a motion? It would be debatable, so if anyone has more to say, they can still say it after the motion. Okay, we have a motion. Is there further debate? Not hearing any, so I take it you are ready to vote. All those in favor of the motion to approve the proposed amendments to Charter Section 108, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion is adopted without dissent. So that takes care of the items of new business. And this is going to turn out to be a 45-minute meeting, it looks like. We could have handled something else.
Yeah.
Does anybody wish to make any comments for the good of the order before we adjourn?
I would say one thing, and I know the law department is extremely busy, and thank you for all the information you've provided. As we keep going and meet regularly, I guess I'm hoping for information to review over the weekend versus maybe Sunday night into Monday. I don't know how possible that will always be, but the more information, the earlier the information, the better. But
Yeah, I understand, and we will absolutely try our best to do that. You know, it wasn't possible this time. We were preparing a PowerPoint because we wanted to also, and we wanted to make sure it made sense to flow with the information we were providing. So we will try our best to do that. But I can't always guarantee that, but we will try. I understand we'd like to get it to you as soon as possible.
no problem. Thank you for all you do.
Anything else for the good of the order? If not, I think we're probably ready to adjourn. Is there any objection to adjournment?
I'm here.
I hereby declare us adjourned.